traveling at the speed of ideas on the Knowledge Transfer Exchange. Brought to you by the Florida Department of Transportation, the Training Development Team, and the State Office of Construction. David Sadler, Director, 605 Swanee Street, Tallahassee, Florida, 850-414-4150. And now, today's guest.
Get started. All right, so we all know here in the construction office, unless you live under a rock, that DOT develops, advertises, and lets a lot of contracts. A lot. So currently, going through Mike Johnson's ad hoc report system, we know that the department has about 453 active construction projects, totaling just over $10 billion. And if you stop and think about that for a minute, that is an immense work program. You know, sometimes in our office we get the opportunity to travel, and if you speak with your counterparts in other parts of the country, you really start to gain some perspective of just how big that program is. There are states adjacent to us that would kill to have this kind of budget. So it's really something I think to be quite proud of, that we're all involved in managing a work program of this size. So because of a work program this size, the legislature has provided us with a series of statutes that really gives the department a variety of different tools or contracting types at our disposal to deliver the work program. So initially when I looked at this, I called it alternative contracting types. But in my office, how I have this broken down, it helps me understand it a little bit more clearly. I'm going to try and do it the same way for you all. So I have two different terms here that we're going to talk about: alternative contracting types, and another term that I call contracting modifiers. So the difference really between the two is that alternative contracting types, I view them as procurement methods or mechanisms for what you want the contractor to do. If he's bidding something, if he's building something, if he's designing and building something, if he's part of the team, those are all parts of what you want the contractor to do. And contracting modifiers are really how the department helps the contractor get there. They're sort of pieces that you can plug into one of these contracting types we're going to talk about that can incentivize the contractor and provide some different mechanisms for them to be incentivized to finish quickly and maybe make a little bit of extra money. So those are the two topics that we're going to talk about: alternative contracting types and these contracting modifiers. So jumping right into alternative contracting types, we really can't go anywhere unless we talk about the granddaddy of them all, the traditional contracting type, design, bid, build. And this is a traditional construction contract where the plans are developed either through a design consultant or in-house. It's a full set of plans, full summary of quantities, all of the pay items are done, and then the contractor, once the department advertises that job, the contractor will bid on those plans and associated pay items in order to win the project. Now this particular method is our most long-standing method to my knowledge, and it has the most rules and statutes associated with it, as it's the statutory basis for all of the other contracting types. So there are a litany of statutes associated with a traditional design bid build project that are really sort of outside of the scope of our discussion today. Zach could probably tell you, give a whole presentation on pre-qualifications. There are some other statutes that are out there that really impact these traditional projects, but those in and of themselves would be complete presentations. So what I wanted to focus on here was just this first section in the statutes, 337.11, 1 through 6. And this sort of lays out the foundation for the department's authority to enter into contracts to pursue construction projects. So these particular statutes, they require the department to ensure that all project descriptions, plan sets are complete, accurate, and up to date. Depending on the dollar amount for these projects, if they're less than $250,000, the statute requires that they be advertised in a local paper where the work will occur. And if they're greater than $250,000, the advertisements are sent out to all the pre-qualified contractors on our list. For these traditional design bid build jobs, the projects can't be advertised until all of our right-of-way is acquired and all utility agreements are executed. And you all probably have picked up just in discussions around our office about design build, those are two key things that really don't have to be finished for design build projects, is some of the advantages. You can go into a design build job without having your right-of-way fully acquired, and utilities, those risks have been pushed down to the contractor. And then finally, under the traditional design bid build job, once the job is advertised, the department may award the project to the lowest responsive bidder, or if there's a snafu or some issue with the bids, the department can reject all bids and re-advertise the proposed work. As a matter of policy, we generally don't like to reject all bids and re-advertise because it starts the entire procurement process over. And all that does is delay the ability to move these jobs out and get them under construction. So moving from the traditional design bid build, we move into design build. And this is the concept where the design build procurement method assigns the design and construction to one firm, sometimes allowing construction to begin before all the plans are complete. We still have some stipulations in there regarding plans being released for construction and things like that. But some of the bigger benefits for this procurement method is it provides a single point of contact for quality, cost, and scheduling from design through construction, and in theory, it will reduce the amount of change orders and claims due to errors and omissions. And it does that by shifting a lot of the risk that's found really in the design of the job to the contractor. So it becomes their responsibility to chase those things down that the department ordinarily would and make sure that they're addressed in the design and then completed in the construction. So to give you just a little bit of history on design build, Florida DOT has a long and storied past with design build. We did our first pilot project, design build pilot project, I believe back in 1987. So we've been at design build longer than just about any other state in the country. And when you meet with these other states, I can tell you we've done more than any other state in the country. I believe currently we account for a third of all of the design build projects being done by DOTs nationally. So when you remove Florida from that picture, there's not near as much design build going on. So early on, we did a pilot project, and through the course of years, the legislature saw the value in it, and they have allowed the use of design build contracts, as it says here, to expedite project implementation and completion, move everything along more quickly. The statute says for certain major construction projects. And as you see here, these are what I call the big four. You've got major bridges, limited access facilities, buildings, and rail corridor projects. Now this design build major has its own particular specification, or I'm sorry, statute. They're governed by 337.11.7a, and as I said, are considered design build major. So when folks are talking about design build and they mention design build major, it's these four areas where the department is allowed to pursue these jobs. And really, they're allowed to pursue them. They can be larger contract amounts, things of that nature. But if you also have looked around or paid any attention to design build, you know that we do a lot of other design build jobs that maybe don't meet that criteria. They're not a building, not a major bridge, or maybe they're smaller projects less than $25 million, but we still do those. So any project that is not associated with 337.11a would be considered design build minor, and it's governed by its own statute. As you can see here, it's 337.025. This is the innovative contracting statute. So this is a really interesting statute to me. I spent a lot of time reading it, and it basically states that the department can write any kind of contract we want. We can be as innovative as we want in developing a contract. We can put design build aspects into it. It doesn't even have to be design build. We can do a contract based purely on the contractor's qualifications. We could maybe do something on their work history. This allows us a lot of latitude in the kinds of contracts that we can build. However, with that latitude comes some constraints. That innovative contracting statute is capped at $120 million annually. And before you can procure a job under the innovative contracting statute, it has to be submitted and approved by the chief engineer. So one of the things that my office does, me and the folks in my office, we track this $120 million cap. So when a job comes in and they want to use the innovative contracting statute, they want to do a design build minor, something like that, the first thing we have to do is run the numbers and determine whether or not there's space underneath the cap for this year. Because if there's no space, that it's dead in the water. You tell them they have to wait till next year or may have to procure it at a different time. Because that is the very first question the chief engineer asks when we send these requests up. Do we have space under the cap? And it seems to be that if you have space, then they'll start to consider the merits of the job and whether or not they want to move forward under the innovative contracting statute. So leaving the design build realm just a little bit, those really are the bulk of the alternative contracting types that I've seen since coming into this position. But there are some other ones that we're going to discuss. This is another major one, not necessarily in terms of volume, but just in terms of size. And these are public-private partnerships. Now, as you can see here, they have their own statute as well. And what a public-private partnership is by statute, it allows the department to enter into agreements with private entities or consortia, is what the statute says, for the building, operation, ownership, and financing of transportation facilities. So when you think of these, you think of the terms you guys have probably heard: design, build, finance, design, build, operate, and maintain, concessionaire agreements, things of that nature. So these are large jobs, high dollar amounts, where the department has entered into an agreement with usually a rather large entity to undertake this work. So under the statute, there are a couple of caveats that must be met. The statute says that these are intended for large projects greater than $500 million. So some examples would be the I-4 Ultimate, the Port of Miami Tunnel, big projects that quite honestly would probably never be built under any other circumstances. The department just could not afford to put that much money into one of these projects. So they must meet the public interest. And here's a caveat. It speaks to what I just mentioned. No state funds can be used for these projects unless it's part of the state highway system. There are a number of caveats for these big projects that have to be in place. Here are a couple of more. So there are safeguards to ensure that there's minimum convenience to the traveling public, no further costs or disruptions in the event that the entity or the public-private partnership, or P3, goes default or goes belly up. So when the folks who are building that contract or writing that contract are in the process of doing that, they have to make sure that there are mechanisms in place that if this large consortium goes under, we're going to be able to minimize the disruption to the public. There are also additional safeguards in place to ensure that both the department and the private entity have the ability to add capacity to that project, or I have or facilities in the area, but it's or to projects with similar origins and destinations is how the statute reads. So as big as those projects are, the folks who write those contracts have to build in those mechanisms that allow the department or these entities to add capacity to the existing job or to make adjustments or improvements to those facilities in the same area. And then finally, there are several different ways that you can do design, build, finance, or concessionaire's agreement, but one thing that must happen at the end of all of these, the facility must be owned by the department when the agreement ends. So when you get done, like, I'll give an example of one of these larger projects, I believe I-4 Ultimate. So they've got Dave, is it a 30-year or 35-year concessionaire's agreement?
I-4 Ultimate is 35.
So 35 years, at the end of 35 years, they'll operate and maintain that. At the end of that 35-year period, we have a handback agreement where the department will go in and will perform some basic inspections, make sure that the infrastructure is still good, but then they will hand that entire facility back to the department and we will continue to own it. And there are some pretty good examples of these larger projects. It's not done very often, but when it is done, they're sizable. As I said, everybody is familiar with the Port of Miami Tunnel, and you'd have to be living in a cave if you haven't heard of I-4 Ultimate. And then now we're talking about beyond the Ultimate and some other larger P3 projects. So moving on down the line, out of design build and even the P3 realm, we've come into some other alternative contracting types that, quite frankly, we don't see as often or very often, really at all. Here's a prime example. These are lump sum projects. And as it says here, it's a method of contracting where the contractor submits a lump sum bid for all the work versus bidding individual pay items. The idea behind these, it's supposed to reduce design and contract admin costs. And the takeaway I get from these is typically used for low-risk projects with well-defined scope. Very small. The best example, I looked and I went and talked to the folks in design because they are the holders of the lump sum guidelines. Milling and resurfacing. We have typical sections. In theory, we know what's there. There's not a lot of risk. There are not a lot of unknowns. We have a high rate of high confidence in the quantities and the work that's to be done in that area. So milling and resurfacing is a good example of this type of contract. And quite honestly, don't see it very often. At least I haven't seen it very often, but I do know that it's used. So the payments are based on an approved schedule values or payout schedule. The big thing in the field, our field inspection personnel are not having to document quantities because it's a lump sum job. So because of that, they have less paperwork to do and should be focusing on inspection, quality, and conformance with the contract documents. And finally, the last alternative contracting type that I have is construction management at risk, or CM at risk. This is another contracting type that the construction office really doesn't use very often at all. It's primarily used for buildings, and as everybody here knows, we build roads more than anything else, so we don't do a lot of building construction. But it's a neat approach. It's really a team approach. Team approach for planning, design, and construction of a project in order to control time and cost. And as you can see here, the team consists of an owner, the designer, architect or engineer, and then a construction manager. The department brings on a construction manager just like they would bring on a consultant designer. And the owner, construction manager, and designer are supposed to be on the same team. So as the design is being developed, the construction manager does these value engineering or constructability reviews during the pre-construction phases. They can make suggestions, they can propose changes, things of that nature, but the department still has complete approval for all changes during the design. As they've gone through and conducted these reviews, once you get around 50% plans, the construction manager will submit a guaranteed maximum price to the owner. So because they've been involved all during design, pre-construction, they've had their say in design changes and things of that nature. They're intimately familiar with the job as it has progressed through design. So they are able to provide, based on their involvement, a guaranteed maximum price. So they will then move forward with constructing that job, and they cannot exceed the price that they have submitted. And one of the big tools they have in making sure that cost stays down, aside from being involved in the design, is they own all of the subcontracts. They're required to do all of the subcontracting. So being involved with the design early, being involved in all of the changes, and then having control over all of the subcontracting that's done to get the job finished allows them to submit a guaranteed maximum price and hopefully come in at or under. We're going to move on to the next topic here. We talked about alternative contracting types. Now we're going to come into the term that I call them contract modifiers. So as I said before, these contracting types, these are all the different things that we want the contractor to do. These modifiers are things that can be plugged into those contract types to add incentives, or in some cases disincentives, to help get the contractor to where we want to be. Another way I look at it is if you look at a design build job, we're all familiar with specifications. A design build job has several lists of special provisions that can be plugged in to a design build contract. Contract modifiers are those special provisions. So you wouldn't have a contract modifier as a standalone contract. It's a piece that's plugged in to modify the contract. So to run through these quickly, the first one, the biggest one that we see a lot is incentive-disincentive. It's an alternative contracting technique where we incentivize the contract with monies that are paid to the contractor for early completion of a project, or we can have disincentives if they happen to run over and don't complete the project on time. These IDs are assessed on a daily basis, and they can be plugged in for specific milestones or to encourage timely completion of the contract. The incentive-disincentive for a particular project is set by the department, and it's based on daily road user costs as well as CEI and administration costs expended by the department. Now this is important. This is something that we do quite a bit of in dealing with incentive-disincentive is the notion of road user costs. When we're dealing with design build and even traditional jobs where we use incentive-disincentive, one of the things we always ask that Dave always reinforces when these things come up is, how did you develop your road user cost? Is it a road user cost that's defendable? And is it something that fits the location? So the districts are really good about coming up with justifications for road user costs, but those road user costs are used for a variety of different things that you'll see here. Not only incentive, disincentive, but they can be used for damage recovery. They can be used for a couple of different things in here. But it is key to make sure that those road user costs are accurate and, more importantly, defendable. Because if you start throwing out disincentives to contractors, it's one of the first things they're going to say is, well, hold on, where did you come up with this number? And it's important to know that a road user cost in Milton is going to be very different than a road user cost in Miami. So all those things kind of play into that incentive-disincentive modifier. Moving on from ID, there's a no excuse bonus. This is a concept that's intended to shorten the construction time. And we do that by putting a big old pile of money at either a milestone or at the completion date of the contract. There's really no other way to explain it. We put a big pot of money at a milestone or at the end of the contract and say, contractor, chase it. Do whatever you have to do to get there and get this bonus. And you know, I think sometimes there are some folks out here who think that the department will put these bonuses in and we don't want the contractor to achieve it. That's not the case. If we put it in there, we have put a premium on that piece of work that needs to be done or the completion date that needs to be met. So by all means, if the department has deemed it necessary to put a bonus on something, we want them to hit it because it's important to us enough that we've incentivized it with money. But, and I think I just covered all this, bonuses can be placed on specific milestones or project completion dates or both. It just depends on the nature of the project and the areas that you want to incentivize. Is everybody familiar with what a milestone is? It may be a point in time or a completion of a piece of work within the contract date or the contract time. So you may have a milestone, you want someone to do a piece of bridge repair on a construction project within the first 150 days. But it's paramount that it get done, so you've put a no excuse bonus on that bridge repair work being done in the first 150 days. And you want the contractor to chase that. But one of the things about no excuse bonuses is it's true to its name, no excuse. Unforeseen conditions, weather days, none of those things are taken into consideration when granting a bonus. As it says here, bonuses are tied to drop dead dates, and they are either met or they are not. If the bonus is not met, the contractor will not receive the bonus. So that, let me back up here because that's what the specification says. That's, I think it's 813. Well, there's a series of special provisions under 813, but in 813 it talks about the no excuse bonus. And this language is pretty hard and fast. However, as with a lot of things, there is a little bit of gray area there. So under no excuse bonus, if the contractor feels that there's been a catastrophic event or circumstances beyond his control that impacted his ability to chase the bonus, and he's able to demonstrate that he has aggressively and actively pursued the work throughout the course of the contract time, he can submit a request. Most of the times it's through the district, but he submits a request up to the chief engineer to ask for a bonus extension date. A bonus date extension. There we go. I'll give you a perfect example. We just looked at one in District 6, Miami, doing a roadway construction project. The contractor had completed the roadway construction, but they had two separate events where a City of Hialeah water main leaked, ruptured, and destroyed a portion of the roadway. So in both instances, the City of Hialeah came out and made the repair, but they were unable to repair the roadway construction that had been done previously. So the department requested that the contractor go back and fix it. So the contractor had already established that they had been effectively and aggressively been pursuing the work. They'd asked to work on weekends. They'd asked to work during holidays. So they had been aggressively pursuing this bonus. They were asked to go back and fix the roadway, which they started to do. But where they got into trouble was, time-wise, they ran into the Christmas holiday where the department had already deemed you cannot close these lanes, you cannot work on these specific days. So through no fault of their own, they were not allowed to chase the bonus during that time period. So they had sent a request up to Dave and then ultimately to Courtney Drummond asking for, I believe it's a 12-day extension to offset the time where they were physically not allowed to work. So that's kind of how that works. It really is no excuse except for these catastrophic events or events deemed beyond the control of the contractor. And they must demonstrate, this can't be overstated, they have to demonstrate that they have aggressively pursued the work the entire time. Moving further down the line to these contract modifiers, we have A plus B bidding. And as you can see here, the cost or the A component is a traditional bid amount. It's the dollar amount tied to the contract items. That's the A component. And the B component here is a bid for the total number of calendar days required to complete the project as estimated by the bidder. So let's take it back. Well, here, let me advance real quick and show you this formula. A plus B is the total bid, where A is the standard bid cost and B is time. So let's go back to a traditional design bid build project. We've provided the plans, we've advertised the job, except now we're going to plug in this formula. The department has an idea that this job is going to be 720 days. That's kind of our estimate. So we're going to allow the contractor to bid the dollar amount for the pay items, but now we want him to bid time. And what he's going to do here, as you can see here, his time bid is the number of days times the road user costs per day. So this is an incentive to shorten your construction time frame, because the shorter your construction time, the smaller your overall bid is. And even with the time component, as you can see, the project is awarded to the contractor with the lowest sum. So you've got pay items, materials, and quantities that are somewhat fixed, where this gives the contractor the opportunity to look at his materials and methods, or means and methods, and determine if he can cut time to the point where it's a financial benefit to him. He has some mean or method that allows him to shorten his schedule, and he's confident enough that he can bid that way, get the overall lowest bid, and win the project. Okay, lane rental. This is similar to A plus B bidding. We usually only see this, it works exactly the same way, but this is usually plugged into projects where we know we're going to have lane rental. We've recently looked at one, I believe, on the Gateway that's a spin-off of this for detour rental. But it's the same thing. We have a cost plus time component, and this would be where the contractors are bidding on lane rental, on a lane rental project, to determine the number of days that the lane will be closed. The more they can shorten the number of days that lane is closed, the lower their overall bid, the greater their chance of winning the project. One thing to note here, that last sentence, which I believe holds true for the A plus B bidding as well. Contractors using more lane rental days than which they bid will be charged a lane rental fee. So go back a little bit to the A plus B bidding. Okay, you've done great. You've shortened your schedule way down, but the department's going to hold you to that schedule. So if you miss it, if you're not complete, then you go into liquidated damages. So it's something that the contractors have to balance. So here, this is just more information on lane rental. It's based on the estimated cost of delay or inconvenience to the road user. The fees assessed at the time the contractor blocks the roadway, and it's deducted from their monthly progress payments. And these lane rental fee rates are stated in the bidding proposal, so they know up front what the rate should be, and they'll know whether or not they're going to be charged daily, hourly, or even down to 15 minutes. It just depends on where you are. In a highly urban environment, that 15 minutes could mean the world. You know, I hate to keep picking on Milton, but if you're back over in Milton, you know, I don't know that you'd have a lane rental fee associated with it. And if you did, it'd probably be daily, maybe even weekly. I'm not sure. But it really plays into an urban environment versus a rural environment and how important it is that those lanes get opened up in a timely manner. So you guys will be happy to know we're on our last modifier. This is the bid averaging method. This is an interesting method. I've got to be honest with you. I haven't encountered it. It's not something that we use much at all. In fact, in speaking with Dave earlier, we've only used it once. And after I go through this, I'll allow him to give his thoughts on this particular method. So the idea here is to get contractors to bid a true and reasonable cost for the project. It allows the contractor to bid what the actual project will cost without needing to be the lowest bidder. And in a nutshell, well, it says here these contracts are included under the $120 million cap and must be approved by the chief engineer. As I said before, I've never seen one, but that's how it's done. It can only be used on 100% state-funded projects. And really what it is, as the name states, we're averaging bids. So if you have 5 or more bids, you throw out the high and the low, you average the ones in between, and then you select the contractor who's closest to the average. Not the lowest, but the one who's closest to the average. And if you have 3 or 4 bids, you average all the bids and select the contractor who's closest. If you have less than 3 bids, you got to throw them all out and start over again. So just to close this up and bring it home, as you can see here, the department has a variety of tools available to deliver construction contracts in many different forms. Each contract type and modifier, when used appropriately, allows the department to deliver construction projects on time and under budget in a variety of different circumstances. So based on this presentation, if you now have a favorite contract type, you can find more information on those types on our website here under alternative contracting. Anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Do alternative contracting types have any effect on federal requirements for construction contracts?
No, they really don't. Alternative contracting types are just a series of tools available to the department to aid in the procurement and completion of construction contracts. All federal requirements still apply.
Does the department use design build max price often?
No, we really don't. Max price is not used very often because the department may be able to find additional money for a project if the bids come in slightly over the price listed. If a district has a concern about the contract amount, the state construction office usually recommends the use of design build with options as opposed to max price.
Can you please explain the difference between alternative contracting types and contract modifiers again?
Sure. As I mentioned in the presentation, this is sort of how I break it down just to make it a little bit easier for me to follow. Alternative contracting types are different procurement methods available to the department for contracting work, and contract modifiers are contract language that can be added to a construction contract to help or incentivize the contractor to finish the work on time or ahead of schedule.
Does the department always have to award a project to the lowest bidder?
No, depending on the specifics of the project, the department may elect to reject all bids and re-advertise for the proposed work. Generally, FDOT does not want to reject all bids and re-advertise because it starts the entire procurement process over again from the beginning, which ultimately delays the project.
Can any project be design build?
That's a great question. Design build projects are governed by Section 337.11(7)(a) of the Florida statutes, which limit the use of design build to major projects. These types of projects include limited access facilities, major bridges, buildings, and rail corridor projects. Any project considered for design build that is not one of these major construction types must be procured under a different statute.
How does FDOT procure design build projects that are not considered major construction projects?
This kind of dovetails with the previous question. Design build projects that do not meet the requirements of major construction under 337.11(7)(a) of the Florida statutes are then procured under the innovative contracting statute, which is 337.025. This statute is capped at $120 million annually, and any projects procured under the statute require approval from the chief engineer.
Has the department ever exceeded the $120 million innovative contracting cap?
No, and that's definitely something we would not want to do. The State Construction Office monitors the amount of cap space available under the innovative contracting statute and provides that information to the chief engineer, who determines whether a project is eligible.
Why does FDOT use bonuses or incentive-disincentive? Shouldn't the contractor finish the project on time?
They should, and that's a question that a lot of people ask. The department uses bonuses and incentive-disincentive strategically to help ensure certain elements of a project are completed as quickly as possible, or the project itself is completed ahead of schedule. There are goals for the contractor to chase outside of the contract duration and are used when the department determines a project or work within a project is critical.
How does the department determine road user costs?
Road user costs are location specific and are based on the average daily traffic within the project area. So the more people using the roadway, the higher the road user cost. A great example would be road user costs in a rural area are much lower than road user costs in a highly urban area.
How many projects are design build versus design bid build?
Currently, the department has 495 active projects. Of those, 74 are design build. It's interesting to note, however, that those 74 projects make up 44.5% of the entire construction budget.
That's it for now, folks. Until next time, buckle up, travel safe, and always keep moving at the speed of ideas on the Knowledge Transfer Exchange. See you next time. This has been a production of the FDOT Construction Training Development Team, building bridges to the future, one mind at a time.